You're listening to GWP Weekly Recap. I'm your host, Isaac Hedges, and our top stories tonight we'll be looking more at the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping, the ongoing government shutdown, and a little bit of a new development in AI. All that and much more coming your way here on GWP Weekly Recap. Well, folks, we are doing something a little bit differently this week, as you might have noticed, something we've done certainly in the past on GWP News Weekly, that we haven't exactly done this for GWP Weekly Recap. I'm not joined here in the studio by co-host Jacob Fulmer, but we will see him momentarily again for the weather and sports segments of your GWP Weekly Recap, so you'll want to stay tuned for that. Hopefully we'll be able to survive until then. So, in the meantime, again, recent developments on the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping situation. We will be going through these topics very quickly. GWP Weekly Recap is just a bit of an overview, some things that happened in the past week, a little bit of a review, and you can find more in-depth coverage on GWP News Weekly, but this will be just a little bit of a rapid-fire review. So, in terms of recent developments on the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping situation, on that front, we've seen a change in request on the ransom note. Again, previously in the last update, I covered this. The request was for $50 million in Bitcoin. Well, that request has since raised. And another interesting change on that front, the request is no longer in Bitcoin. They haven't changed just to US dollars or something. No, they've changed to other cryptocurrency. You might ask why. Well, it's likely that happened. It was certainly speculated that there was a major crash in Bitcoin over the past week, and so now that amount has been doubled, actually, so 100 million in cryptocurrency other than Bitcoin. So an important change on that front. It is an ongoing investigation, and at this point, the Sheriff's Department there has been overwhelmed with the amount of tips they've received there in Arizona. So they are requesting, again, if you have tips on that front, slow down with those. Again, they've gotten a lot of them that have turned out not to be true. They've turned out to be a little bit of a hoax. Again, a personal judgment there. If you've got really something consequential, naturally, you still want to reach out and share that. But again, if it's common knowledge, if there's any chance that this is not really useful information, maybe don't bother with it. But again, that certainly is not the case here at GWP. Again, for GWP News Weekly and all of the sort, we're always looking for new information on that. So if you'd like somewhere to contribute that information to, you can always send that in to us. You can put that in the comments down below the video here, or you can give us a call at 417-448-0819. Again, that number is 417-448-0819. And that about covers the recent developments on the situation with the Nancy Guthrie kidnapping. Now, moving on to other national stories, major national events. We, of course, are still under a government shutdown. Again, this government shutdown, as we mentioned in the past week, specifically affecting DHS, or Department of Homeland Security funding, again, which involves operations with immigration and custom enforcement, as well as TSA, again, with airports. One of the effects of this government shutdown, one of the additional, probably unintended effects of this, was the delay of flights. And that happens increasingly the longer these government shutdowns go. Of course, the most recent one before this was the longest in U.S. history, and we saw some of the negative effects about that. Again, there at the end, there, of course, was a real push naturally to get through with it, given the different effects, the different lapses in funding on account of this. But at this point, there hasn't been a great deal of additional development on that front. Again, in terms of actually reaching a resolution to actually end that government shutdown, again, on the part of either party, it would appear at this point that there's a bit of foot dragging still. Again, moving a bit slow in terms of reaching a resolution on that front to restore some funding. But again, we are already seeing effects of that. And again, to a very recent memory, we've seen some of the effects that government shutdowns such as this can have. So, by all means, it would be worthwhile to get to the bottom of this, but it's just that we haven't seen many steps taken towards that in the past week or so. And naturally, as that is an ongoing developing story, we will continue to cover that. Of course, that being the U.S. government shutdown that is now ongoing. Now, again, in terms of other recent developments, and again, this will be more than anything a little bit of a teaser for something that will hit on this coming week in GWP News Weekly. Again, that would be in relation to the cartoonist recently passed away. We covered a few weeks ago on GWP News Weekly, and I believe maybe even in GWP Weekly Recap, a past edition of that. But again, the cartoonist of the well-known comic strip Dilbert sadly passed away. He was battling with prostate cancer. And of course, we covered that at the time. So, again, a very tragic death there. So, certainly unfortunate for the family and all on that front. But a recent development we've seen on that, which there's been talk of course, in recent times with the metaverse, with different things like that, the idea, say, after someone dies, to upload their consciousness to the metaverse again, so that they can sort of exist beyond the grave in a sense. Again, a very science fiction-y idea up to this point, but again, we've seen recent developments on this now, specifically referring to cartoonist Dilbert Scott Adams. Well, since his death, there have been people online that have set up an AI version of him on the internet again. That features videos of him again, which somewhat resemble deepfake videos, though an important distinction to make is deepfakes, generally speaking, are an imitation of an actual living person, actor, actress, something like that, like we've seen in the past. But again, sort of the difference here, of course, Scott Adams is no longer alive, so it's not so much an imitation of a living person. Again, it's based on many of the things that he said in his life, but again, actually says new things. It's these videos of him, look like him, different things. So we will get more into that, some information about AI afterlife, the whole notion of it, and the situation with Scott Adams and how this has been done with his likeness, of course, after his tragic passing. So you want to stay tuned for that coming up on GWP News Weekly in the week ahead, and that'll about wrap things up for now. So up next is weather with Jacob Fulton.
All right. Thank you, Isaac, for the update. Now we'll go ahead and we'll transition into the weather side of today's weekly recap. So, of course, yesterday we did our test run of our severe weather coverage, what we would do in the event that there was severe weather across the state of Missouri. So hopefully that was insightful for all of our viewers, as well as helpful just to have some more information as to what would be done in that scenario. If you have any feedback for how you think the live stream went, you can always reach out to us to let us know what your opinion of that was. So now we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into today's weather update here on this weekly recap. And you'll notice that we do still have that fire threat. It's further to the west, so it doesn't include us here in Missouri. Part of that has to do with the cold front that came through. So that lowered temperatures, winds also calmed down. The winds were gusting pretty strong yesterday, sustained at times at nearly 25 miles per hour. Gusts were a little bit higher at around 30 to 40. But those winds are going to be even higher today across the state of New Mexico here. So high wind warnings are in effect. We've also got some cold weather advisories in effect across the state of Nevada with some lower temperatures there. We've still got some of those wind advisories across the Great Lakes. And then we also have those winter weather alerts that are still in effect across the Great Lakes, as well as the Northeast here, where we are still experiencing some of that wintry precipitation. So that kind of shows you the overview. We've got our rain to the south. Not much of a severe weather threat today as that cold front has left a lot of those ingredients are gone from what we had yesterday across Illinois and Indiana, where we did have some severe weather. Again, that wintry precipitation staying further towards the north. Mixed precipitation for a few of us across the Northeast as well, with some of those heavier bands of snow continuing to move through across the Great Lakes, and then quite a bit of precipitation out west for us as well. So again, it's going to continue. The storm system out west is going to continue to be very impactful. Heavy rain at times today, as well as some mountainous snow. This from the National Weather Service office in Sacramento, California, showing the timing that the worst of the impacts are going to be tonight. Things are going to start to calm down later today into Saturday, but we're going to have those colder temperatures, and then the rain and the winds will pick up just a little bit on Wednesday. So several more days of activity is expected out west. Something else that we dealt with yesterday was some of those severe thunderstorms. We did have 7 tornado reports, 37 wind reports, and 51 hail reports that came in. The strongest hail report that we had was about 2 inches in diameter, and then we had a few wind reports of nearly 70 miles per hour. And again, you'll notice that we did have a few tornado reports yesterday evening. All of these were in southern Illinois yesterday. You'll notice that we had this one in Mason, Illinois. So we had a couple around the Flat Rock area in Crawford County, Illinois as well. So one in Effingham County as well. So those were the counties that were hit with tornadic winds, or these are the confirmed tornadoes that we have. Some of the stronger wind gusts, so those are the hail reports. Some of these wind reports could definitely be upgraded to tornado reports. So the teams will have to go out and survey the damage to see exactly what it is that we saw yesterday. But either way, at least 7 reported tornadoes yesterday. So quite an active day considering it's the month of February, really our first severe weather outbreak, if you want to call it that. Maybe that's a little bit of a strong term, but our first round of severe weather that we've seen here across the lower 48 so far this early spring, really still late meteorological winter. So as far as today, there is no tornado risk, but the SPC is outlining an area for the potential of stronger winds across the state of North Carolina. Of course, we've also got that precipitation to the north as well as along the deep south here. So not much of a severe weather threat today. Tomorrow, there's a slightly larger area that we do have a slight tornado risk, a slight wind risk, no hail risk as we go across Georgia, South Carolina, and Alabama. That goes for tomorrow. So this is your Saturday severe weather outlook. This is a 1 out of 5 on that scale that the SPC uses for severe weather. Where are we at as far as power outages? Some of those stronger thunderstorms, plus some of those winds that we've had that have been the non-thunderstorm related wind gusts have also been pretty strong, as we mentioned. That's led to us having 136,000 customers without power. 3 states have 10,000 or more. That includes California at the top of the list at 46,000 outages. Ohio's at 23,000. Pennsylvania is at 15,000. Luckily, here in the state of Missouri, less than 500 customers are currently without power. So that is certainly some good news. Again, as we mentioned, we do have that fire threat once again across New Mexico and Texas. Critical fire risk for today, that's a 2 out of 3 on that fire weather index scale. And then we do have that elevated risk in the surrounding areas as well. Lubbock and Amarillo are under that risk for fires as we go into today. Tomorrow, western and central Texas, that's where we're going to have the risk for the elevated fire concerns. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and we're going to look at the future. That was kind of a look at what we're dealing with right now and what we dealt with yesterday. So let's start with an overall view of what's going to be happening across the country. We've got some rain and snow, as we mentioned, across the Great Lakes and Northeast. That's going to continue through the day today, even into tomorrow, where we could see a little bit of lake effect snow. And then we have to watch the possibility for a light wintry mix across Kansas and Missouri later tonight into tomorrow morning. So that's something that we'll watch for. Rain, again, as we mentioned, a slight risk for severe weather as we go into your Saturday across the southeast here. A bit of a break out west, that certainly is needed. And then as we go into Monday, rain and snow is going to return across the Pacific Northwest. So not much of a break, just about a 36-hour break in activity out west. We still have those colder temperatures. This weekend is going to be pretty chilly. It's going to be slightly below average, and there's a couple days where we're going to be hovering around freezing during the afternoon. Low temperatures will be in the teens and 20s across the state of Missouri. So quite a change from what we've seen. Some of you may even have to drip your faucets for a temporary time. That same storm system bringing in the cooler temperatures will then begin to strengthen very rapidly. We could be looking at a bomb cyclone. So a bombogenesis cyclone is definitely possible Sunday night into Monday. What that is a rapidly intensifying area of low pressure. And so that could certainly happen, and that could lead to the risk of a nor'eastern Sunday into Monday. We could be looking at some heavy amounts of snow along Interstate 95. So if you are traveling across the Northeast, some of the major metropolitan international airports, we could experience some delays Sunday into Monday because of the winds. Because a nor'eastern, there's a lot of wind, of course, coastal impacts expected, as well as very heavy amounts of snowfall across that region are expected. And then we won't go beyond that, but that's pretty much what we're going to be experiencing as we go from a national perspective this weekend. So what does that mean for a couple of our different regions? Again, out west, things are going to be staying mainly across the Pacific Northwest, Desert Southwest, and Southern California. Not going to be experiencing a whole lot in the way of precipitation. This is how much snow is in the forecast from now until next week. So this is your 7-day snowfall forecast, and you'll notice not as much snow as what we saw this week, but it is still going to be staying active, especially from Oregon to Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, and Washington. Some of those areas that haven't seen a whole lot so far this season. It's been pretty dry out west for the most part. What about rainfall? It's going to be quite heavy from Northern California all the way up to Washington, where we could see anywhere from about 2 to 4 inches of rain, with isolated amounts of 6 to 8 inches going to be possible. So that's out west. What about in the center of the country? Again, we are watching the possibility of a light wintry mix as we go into tonight and into tomorrow. No accumulation is expected because the ground has been so warm the last several days. The ground temperature will still be above freezing. The road surfaces should also still be above freezing, so not expecting a whole lot in the way of accumulation out of this particular system. And then we could see a clipper across the northern plains as we go into Tuesday. So how much snowfall are we expecting over the next 7 days across the center part of the country here? Potentially anywhere from 6 to 10 inches here across Iowa, Illinois, Indiana, and Ohio and Michigan. So this is over the next 7 days, just kind of a rough estimate of what we could be looking at here. And then again, possibly a dusting. I think 2 inches is a little bit overkill across the state of Kansas, probably an inch at most across the state of Kansas. Here across Missouri, again, a dusting is going to be possible mainly in those grassy elevated surfaces. And then as far as rainfall goes, staying pretty active across the Great Lakes and across the Appalachian Mountains here, across the state of Missouri, not expecting really any precipitation as we go throughout this week, besides that wintry mix that we're expecting later on tonight. And then we'll wrap up here on our regional forecast by showing that snowfall that is expected today through tonight across the Northeast. And then that nor'eastern, again, very, very powerful system that's going to be moving potentially right over that 40-70 benchmark that we always, so there's about where that 40-70 benchmark is, roughly. And so again, it's going to be moving right over that area, bringing in some very heavy snowfall. Our snowfall forecast over the next 7 days, very, very high on the very high side, I would say. Many areas picking up over a foot of snow. Most spots picking up about 4 to 8 inches, potentially 8 to 12 as we go into this weekend. That includes what we're seeing, the storms. So that includes the storm that we're dealing with right now, and that includes the storm that we're going to be experiencing over the weekend, that nor'eastern system, as well as some additional snow chances later into next week. Let's look at our temperature outlook, staying well below average across most of the country, with the exception being the southeastern U.S. That's going to continue through this weekend. Eventually, as we go into Sunday night, we will see that colder air make its way down to the Gulf Coast, seeing some of the coldest temperatures that we've seen in quite some time, a couple of weeks at least. And then but it will be very short-lived, especially across here in the state of Missouri, as we will return to above average temperatures as we go into next week. The last thing that we're going to show you for today is the long range forecast. Just yesterday, the well, just yesterday, NOAA issued the monthly temperature outlook, showing temperatures for the month of March are expected to be above average for the majority of the country, the exception being the Northwest, the Northern Plains, and the state of Alaska. Everywhere else expecting to stay above average. I guess the Northeast is in that equal chance for temperatures. What about precipitation? The Great Lakes will likely stay pretty active. Pacific Northwest will stay active, but where we really need the precipitation across the state of California, across the Four Corners state, not expecting a whole lot as we're going to be on the below average side of precipitation. Alaska's had quite a bit of snow this season, so that'll be a chance to dry out. Again, this doesn't mean that we won't have any precipitation in the let me go back to that for just a second. That doesn't mean these areas won't have any precipitation, and that doesn't mean these areas will have precipitation every day. It just means that it will be slightly above what you would typically have during the month of March. So just keep that in mind. Of course, March 1st is the beginning of meteorological spring that goes all the way through the month of May. So here's your meteorological spring temperature outlook, likely staying just slightly above average here across the state of Missouri, cooler than average temperatures across the northern plains, quite above average as you go into the desert southwest. This is pretty concerning for fire season in this upcoming summer, especially because not only will we have warm temperatures across the desert southwest, but we'll also have below average precipitation. So that is certainly something worth noting. The Great Lakes likely staying above average, not just for the month of March, but also into April and May as well, with equal chances for precipitation here across the state of Missouri. So hopefully that will help things out with our drought. The last thing we'll show you is the hazards outlook, showing you that slight risk for hazardous amounts of snow between February 27th and March 1st across the Great Lakes, once again showing that things will stay active across the Great Lakes region. Now on to sports. Now we'll go ahead and we'll move into sports here by looking at the medal count for the 2026 Winter Olympics. Again, the closing ceremony is this coming Sunday, so just 48 hours left, or roughly 48 hours left of this year's Winter Olympics. Of course, the next Winter Olympics will not be for another 4 years, so just a couple days left here before that 4 year gap. So, anyway, so we've got Norway that is currently in the lead with 17 gold medals. That is quite impressive. 9 silvers and 10 bronze. That puts them at a total of 36. Norway is definitely pulling away this Winter Olympics, as they have in many previous Winter Olympics, as we've mentioned previously. Where does the U.S. sit? The U.S. is currently in second place. That's certainly pretty good here for the U.S. here. 9 golds, 12 silvers, and 6 bronze. I think it's quite interesting that the U.S. is leading in silver medals. Total, the U.S. has 27. So yes, that is quite a bit less than what Norway has, but still enough to take second place. Italy's in third with 26 medals, also having 9 golds. Germany has 6 gold, 22 total for number 4 spot. France is in fifth place with 20 medals. The Netherlands in sixth place with 16. Switzerland and Sweden are tied in seventh place with 16 medals, 6 golds, 6 silver, and 4 bronze. Austria at the number 9 spot with 5 gold. Japan also has 5 gold, but has 24 medals total in the Winter Olympics. So that is where things stand on the Winter Olympics. Again, as we mentioned, a couple more days are left before that closing ceremony that will take place there in Milan in a couple of days on Sunday. So that's that update here on the Winter Olympics. Now we'll go ahead and we'll move into men's basketball. Then we'll go into women's basketball after that. And so we'll start by looking at the Associated Press's updated top 25. Michigan has now taken the number one spot after a couple of losses from Arizona that we mentioned previously from last week. Michigan is 25-1. They've had an 11-game win streak right now. Houston is number two, but they have recently dropped a game. They're 23-3. Duke is number three at 24-2. Arizona 24-2 for the number four spot. UConn just had a recent loss, so they're 24-3, the number five spot. Iowa State is number six. Purdue is seven. Kansas has moved up to number eight. Nebraska is now nine. Illinois is 10. We could go all the way down the list. Gonzaga, Florida, Texas Tech, Virginia, Michigan State, North Carolina, St. John's, St. Louis, Vanderbilt, Arkansas, Louisville, Miami, Ohio, that's still undefeated, BYU, Wisconsin, and Alabama. So that is the top 25. We listed off 11 Gonzaga all the way down to number 25 Alabama. As far as some of the standings go for that, of course, we're getting down to the wire. Looking at the American Athletic Conference, South Florida is still in the lead with a conference record of 11-3. Tulsa is at 9-5, so things are still pretty close in that conference standings, I guess, as we get closer to those conference championship games that will be taking place within a few weeks here. Duke is currently in the lead in the Atlantic Coast Conference at a 13-1 record in conference, but Virginia has a seven-game win streak and is 11-2 in conference in the for second place. Then we look at the Big 12 Conference. Arizona is currently at the top, 11-2, but Houston is also 11-2. So those two teams are both tied. If you want to look at it from that perspective, they are tied as far as the Big East. St. John's with that 12-game win streak now in the top 25. They're 14-1 in conference. UConn is closing in though at 14-2, although but they did have that recent loss. So that, of course, has hurt them just a little bit, but they're definitely still in it. In the Big Ten, we've got Michigan on that 11-game win streak, is undefeated on the road, and is 15-1 in conference. Illinois not that far behind though at 13-3. They're on a two-game win streak. So let's see, we'll now go to the Mid-American Conference. Of course, Miami, Ohio has been one of the big stories. They're on a 26-game win streak. They are undefeated at home and away. So, and then we got the Missouri Valley, Belmont, 14-3 in conference. They're doing quite well. Let's see. We've also got the Mountain West Conference. Utah State is 13-2. San Diego State knocking on their door at 23 or 12-3 rather. New Mexico is in third at 11-4. And then finally, with that, we will finish things off by looking here at the Southeast Conference. Florida's 11-2 in conference. This has been a tough conference. Only one team has not lost more than three games. So if you want to look at it like that. So that's where we're at on those basketball standings in conference. We've had quite a few big games that took place. Of course, on Wednesday, we had quite a few games that took place. We had Arkansas that lost to Alabama, 117-115. That game went into double overtime. Creighton beat UConn. Creighton was undefeated. They won 91-84, so that was a big game. Arizona took down BYU 75-68. Missouri, unranked, took down number 19 Vanderbilt at home 81-80. I was actually present for that game. It came down to a missed half-court shot from Vanderbilt. They came back from a 20-point deficit. So that was pretty impressive. That's most likely why they stayed in the rankings. And then one of the big scores was Illinois, who won 101-65 against USC. So, of course, today we've got some really big matchups that are going to be taking place, but tomorrow, even bigger matchups are in store. We've got number 4 Arizona taking on number 2 Houston. We've got the big rivalry of Missouri and Arkansas that's going to be taking place. Arkansas ranked number 20. Another big rivalry is Alabama 25 and LSU unranked. And then probably the biggest game of the week is going to be Duke number 3 taking on number 1 Michigan. That should be quite a matchup. That's going to be starting at 5:30 Central Time. So also just a couple of other big matchups. Number 2 Houston is taking on number 8 Kansas on Monday night. So this coming Monday night, a couple of big games are in store for that. All right. What about on the women's basketball side of things? UConn still number one, undefeated, 28 and 0, still super impressive in my opinion. So UCLA number two, South Carolina number three, Texas number four. Um, UCLA, I mean, that's pretty impressive. They've won 20 games in a row. Duke is on a 17 game win streak, so those are impressive. Texas is four, as we mentioned, Vanderbilt five, Michigan six, LSU seven, Louisville eight. Duke is nine with their 17 game win streak, as we mentioned before. Ohio State coming off a couple of losses at number 10. And then the order from there goes Oklahoma number 11, TCU 12, and then it goes Iowa, Maryland, Baylor, Kentucky, Ole Miss, Michigan State, West Virginia, Texas Tech, Tennessee, North Carolina, Minnesota, Georgia, and finally Alabama with a three-game losing streak here at the number 25 spot. And then we've got a couple of big games that are in store for women's basketball. First of all, Michigan State beating Northwestern 104 to 68 on Wednesday. That was pretty impressive. UConn taking down Villanova 83 to 69, the final in that game on Wednesday. Ranked 20 Texas Tech beat ranked 15 Baylor at their home game there, 87 to 56, so over a 30-point win for them. Minnesota took down a top 10 team, Ohio State, 74 to 61 as well on Wednesday. Yesterday we had a couple of other big matchups, North Carolina and Virginia Tech. That game went into overtime. Number 22 North Carolina coming up with the victory in the OT, 66 to 63. Oklahoma beat Georgia 71 to 67 in a very close matchup. Texas A&M beat ranked 21 Tennessee 82 to 74 yesterday. And then we had South Carolina number 3 that took down Alabama number 25. Again, as we mentioned, they're on that three-game losing streak. 76 to 57 was the final in that game. And then there was a close one with LSU and Ole Miss. 78 to 70 was the final, with LSU coming out on top with that game. We've got a couple of games going into tomorrow, but some bigger matchups on your Sunday. We've got Ole Miss taking on South Carolina. That's 17 Ole Miss, 3 South Carolina. Michigan ranked 6 taking on 13 Ohio. Providence is taking on number 1 UConn. We'll see if they can keep their undefeated streak alive. That game starting at noon Eastern on Sunday. We've got Tennessee and Oklahoma facing off on Sunday afternoon. Missouri facing off against number 7 LSU. We've got Kentucky and Vanderbilt facing off. Michigan State, Minnesota also facing off Sunday evening as well. All right, well, that wraps up things for tonight on the GWP Weekly Recap. Have a great weekend.